Rome had a procedure for destroying a person after they were already dead. It was not enough to execute them. It was not enough to confiscate their property, exile their family, or burn their papers. The Roman Senate had a formal legal mechanism for something far more radical, the erasure of a person from history itself. They called it Damnatio Memoriae, the condemnation of memory, and it worked like this. The moment the Senate voted for damnatio, every image of the condemned became a target. Statues were pulled from their plinths and smashed. Faces were chiseled off relief carvings on public monuments. Names were scratched from inscriptions on stone walls, sometimes so aggressively you can still see the gouge marks today. Coins bearing the condemned face were recalled and melted. Public records were altered. The physical world was systematically edited to produce a single result. A person who had existed at the center of Roman power was made to have never existed at all. It happened to emperors. It happened to generals. It happened to members of the imperial family who had become inconvenient. And it is one of the most revealing things Rome ever did, because the scale of the effort required to erase someone is also a perfect measure of how much they mattered. You do not spend that much energy destroying a nobody. What I want to tell you about is what happened when it failed. Because it did fail. Not always, but in specific documentable cases, the erasure did not hold. And the reason it did not hold tells you something about the limits of official power over physical objects, and about the people who chose, at considerable personal risk, to preserve what the state had ordered destroyed. Subscribe to Carrara. This is what history looks like when you examine what was supposed to disappear. In 96 AD, the Emperor Domitian was assassinated by members of his own household. The Senate voted Damnatio Memoriae the same day. It was one of the most thorough erasures in Roman history. His name was removed from public buildings. His statues were pulled down across the empire. His face was chiseled from relief carvings on the Arch of Titus, on the Cancellaria reliefs, on monuments he had commissioned himself. The official record was altered to make Domitian's 15-year reign look like an interruption in legitimate governance rather than a chapter of it. And then something happened that the Senate did not anticipate. People kept the portraits, not publicly, not displayed on plinths in forums, but hidden, buried in gardens, pushed to the back of private collections, stored in the kind of places where official inspectors would not think to look. We know this because archaeologists have found them. Domitian portrait busts and heads that survived the damnatio intact, some clearly hidden deliberately, showing none of the chisel damage that marked publicly displayed images. Someone chose to preserve what the state ordered destroyed. We do not know who. We do not know why. The act of preservation was itself a crime, and no one left a record of committing it. What we have is the object. Domitian's face, looking out from white marble, 20 centuries after the Roman Senate voted that face out of existence. The erasure failed because it required the cooperation of every private individual in the empire, and some of them declined. There is a detail in Roman sculpture history that took art historians decades to fully understand. And once you know it, you cannot look at Roman portrait busts the same way again. When Damnatio Memoriae was declared, the Senate faced a practical problem. Rome was full of expensive, high-quality marble portraits of the condemned. Destroying them was wasteful. The marble itself had value, and so a solution emerged that was, in its own way, more disturbing than simple destruction. The condemned face was carved down, ground back into the stone until only the skull shape remained, and then a new face was carved over it. A new emperor, a new general, a new acceptable person. The same block of marble, the same body, the same hair, but a different identity cut into the surface. Art historians call these recarved portraits, and they have been identified across dozens of surviving Roman busts. The evidence is in the proportions. A recarved head is subtly wrong. The neck is too thick because material was removed from the face rather than the neck. The ears are in slightly the wrong position relative to the new features. The depth of carving is inconsistent. To the untrained eye, it looks like an ordinary portrait. To a conservator, under raking light, it looks like what it is: a palimpsest, a face written over another face. The condemned emperor is still in there, underneath, unreachable but present. The erasure was never complete. It was only cosmetic. I keep returning to the people we cannot name, the historians we have, the emperors we have, the senators who voted for Damnatio Memoriae, the craftsmen who chiseled the faces. All of this is documented. What is not documented is the decision to hide a portrait in a garden, to wrap a condemned face in cloth and push it into a storage room, to bury a statue deep enough that the inspectors would not find it. These acts of preservation required calculation. Roman law was clear. Possessing an image of a condemned person was itself a crime. The people who chose to keep these objects knew the risk, and they kept them anyway. For 20 centuries, the objects outlasted both the law that condemned them and the empire that made the law. Why? We cannot know. Some kept them for financial value. Portrait busts were expensive, and destroying them felt like waste. Some kept them out of loyalty. Some simply did not believe the Senate had the right to tell them what to do with their own property. The Roman state, at the height of its power, issued a decree of total erasure, and it did not work. The objects were too numerous, too distributed, too embedded in private life for any central authority to reach all of them. The face of Domitian looks out from a museum in Naples today because someone in 96 AD made a private decision that the Senate was wrong. We will never know their name, but we have the evidence of their choice. Subscribe to Carrara. We find the stories that were supposed to stay buried. There is something the Roman Senate did not understand about objects. A decree exists in language. It lives in documents, in spoken proclamations, in the institutional memory of those who enforce it. When the empire collapses, and Rome did collapse, the decree collapses with it. The authority evaporates. The marble does not evaporate. The face of Domitian outlasted the Senate that condemned it, the empire that enforced the condemnation, and every subsequent authority that might have renewed the erasure. It outlasted them all through the simple physical persistence of stone. Marble is heavier than a decree. And here is the detail that I find most difficult to set aside. Damnatio Memoriae was supposed to produce a world in which the condemned person had never existed. A world with no images, no inscriptions, no physical traces. But the very thoroughness of the attempt, the chiseled faces, the gouged inscriptions, the recarved portraits, left its own evidence. The damage to the Arch of Titus, the wrong proportions of the recarved busts, the gouge marks where names used to be. All of this is physical proof that someone was here, that they mattered enough to erase, that the erasure was carried out at enormous effort and expense. The attempt to make Domitian disappear is itself the proof that Domitian existed. The Senate got that wrong. You cannot erase someone by destroying their image. You can only change what kind of evidence they leave behind.